Hi, we're Oxygen Conservation, and this is the Shoot Room Sessions. Kat, welcome to the Shoot Room.
Thanks. It's great to be here.
We have been trying for ages to make diaries work right with your various
About
adventures.
half a year, I think. Yeah.
Yeah. But thank you for finding the time. Really appreciate it.
No worries.
Can you tell people who you are and what you do?
I'm Dr. Kat Bruce. I'm a biodiversity scientist and the founder of a nature tech company called NatureMetrics.
The most exciting nature tech company in the UK right now?
We think so.
So do we.
Absolutely. A pioneer of nature tech, I would say.
How do you feel when you say that? Does that make you proud?
It does make me proud, yeah, especially thinking back to when I started this. And I'm a big one for not liking to be told that I can't do something. But I do remember when I first went to investors and said, I'm going to start a business to revolutionize the scale of biodiversity monitoring. And they went, what? Who's going to pay money to know about biodiversity? It's not important.
What year was that when you...
10 years ago.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay.
So 2014, 2015 was when I first started
And
talking.
people's perceptions and relationships with the environment very different then, right? We've come a long way in 10 years.
Utterly different. Yeah. I mean, there was no concept of nature being something that was investable, that was relevant or important to anyone with money. It was thought to be either a tick box exercise or a hobbyist activity. So, you know, one of the things that I've most enjoyed over the last 10 years is watching that whole, you know, it's almost like the whole world woke up and went, oh, nature's kind of important. It's, you know, at the base of everything we do and our ability to feed the world and combat climate change. And so that, you know, I really think it has been a transformative decade for nature. So I'd love to say that I saw that all coming and that was why I started NatureMetrics, but it's very much a matter of being in the right place at the right time and some luck.
So talk to us about how you got to that place. So take us back to the start of your story. Like, where did you grow up? Take us through education and how you came to start the company.
So I'm your classic non-linear person.
They're always the best conversations.
It's a series of accidents, I think. So I did actually grow up spending a lot of time outdoors. Both of my grandparents were professors of geography. So my grandmother was a glaciologist and she spent a lot of time up in the Alps leading expeditions and field work. My grandfather studied ancient lake beds in Africa, and they were actually some of the first people looking at climatic history and historical changes in climate. And so that was like in my blood and in our bones, and it felt like everyone in my family went into something to do with the environment, and I was determined to buck the trend. So I was quite academic at school. And I ended up doing A-levels in Latin, ancient Greek, classical civilization, and maths. And I went to Oxford to study classics.
Okay. What did your family think at that point?
They've always been really good at letting me sort of follow my own nose. Nobody ever tried to discourage me from anything. And I found so much actually through the classics that I wouldn't ever have imagined would be sort of, you know, laying such solid foundations. But for example, when I was doing my A-levels, we translated, produced and directed one of the Greek plays for performance at school, with half of it in ancient Greek and half of it in English. And that was my first real leadership experience of bringing a team together, putting something together and making it happen.
Did you recognise you were leading at the time? Or is it only with hindsight you've seen that as leadership?
It tends to happen with hindsight. And I never go out going, I want to be a leader. I go, this needs to happen. Okay, no one else is going to make it happen. Right, come on, let's get on and do it. I would always much rather that somebody else took the lead in these things, and I love being a supporting act. But yeah, mostly I get frustrated if things aren't happening that I can see and have a real sort of vision for. I ended up at Oxford studying classics, and after about a year, I don't know quite what happened. But I just suddenly went like, what am I doing? Why am I here? And I think I loved all of the big picture things about the way that sort of art and architecture and literature and language and drama and philosophy and politics all came together in particularly 5th century BC Athens. And I think I've always loved sort of systems and the ways that lots of different things sort of interact to make a whole. And then what I found at Oxford was it was all about pulling it apart into the tiniest pieces and sort of over analyzing everything, and it lost all the magic. So I ran away to the Amazon, as you do.
Okay, how?
I took a year out from the course at Oxford initially. Worked in a pub. Didn't know what to do with myself. Bit of a low point, actually. And one day my boss at the pub said to me,
Fancy going to the Amazon this afternoon?
No, she said, why don't you need an adventure? Why don't you just go and like feed lions in Africa or something? And I think I literally went home and thought, oh, that's a good idea. Googled, they must be in the earliest days of searching online. Expedition to feed lions in Africa. Went down a rabbit hole and found an expedition that was leaving the next month to the middle of the Ecuadorian Amazon, like 100 miles from the nearest road. I had no idea. I'd never even heard of Ecuador. I knew very little about the Amazon, but it was far away and sounded fun. And they'd been fully booked for 2 years, but when I called them up, someone had dropped out that morning. And so I slotted in and ended up spending 3 months, far, far away from anything in the middle of the rainforest, doing biodiversity surveys to help the indigenous community who owned the land to get reserve status on the land because they were threatened by oil and sort of everything else that was going on in the area. And weirdly, because I'd learnt so much ancient Greek by heart before I knew what it all meant, I'd had to learn it all by ear. And that meant that I was very good at learning sounds. And most of the ways you do bird surveys in the forest is by sound. And so I learnt like 150 bird calls within a very short space of time and got super involved then in the research. And that was the beginning of everything else.
I love when you can cross a skill set or an idea or a tool to a different arena. And that we're doing a huge amount of recruitment at the moment as we scale the team. When those things they can't pop on a CV, right? That anecdote doesn't come through a CV, but when you have a person in the room and they share something like that, you're like, oh my God. We've got Hugo in the room today who comes from like a machine learning and data science background, which is awesome to put into the mix of what we're doing at the moment because people aren't using that in the same way as we are with landscape. So when you can bring a skill set from one world and put it into, that's when really exciting things happen.
Oh, it's amazing because then you have this like real diversity of people and backgrounds and skill sets that you put together. And I think, for me as well, it was such a big learning that whatever you've done in life, you take lessons from it. You learn a lot that is transferable even if it's not obvious.
And you don't know till years later.
No.
So I had some, that sounds like a really interesting chapter of life. I had some horrific jobs when I was growing up. Oil refineries, steel works, factories. And there was almost a coaching point I used with one of the team last week that I remember from 20 years ago working on a steelworks. I was like, oh, I had no idea how I learned that then. And until you come to apply it, you don't know you were collecting that skill set or lesson.
Exactly. And it gives you then so much confidence to take side steps and to start something new, knowing that, okay, there's a lot that I don't know, but I'm bringing a lot to it. And I think that was such an amazing lesson to learn early on. And it fits with my personality type as well, quite well, which is quite non-linear, quite sort of, follow my nose, see, going in this direction. Oh, there's something interesting.
Have you always known that was your personality type?
No, I've learned that over time. I was married for 10 years to a lovely guy, but utterly the opposite. He was totally linear. He'd known what he wanted to do since he was a kid and had done everything step by step and, had all gone to plan. And I'm completely the opposite. But it's then sort of the more you understand that, the more you can sort of work with it and use it as a strength.
It sounds like you've learned to love that non-linear nature now.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Okay, so bring us back from the Amazon. You came back eventually.
I did come back eventually. I was persuaded to come back. I actually I spent a couple of years then back and forth to the Amazon, leading expeditions and spending time in research stations and doing field
And
work.
you told Oxford you weren't coming back?
I did at that point, yes. I had decided that my future was
They weren't out
probably-
looking for you. No, where's she going?
No. And I think the thing that really got me was actually for me, conservation has never just been about the wildlife. It's been about the interaction between people and nature. And so, going right back to that first experience, it was about giving some resilience and sustainable income streams to the community so that they were less vulnerable to the bribes that would come in from the oil and gas sector, and they knew they had oil underneath. And from that, I then started reading a lot about what had gone on in that part of the Amazon, and that was, that for me was the galvanizing thing. So I knew I wanted to work in that area. I really just wanted to stay out there. But eventually someone persuaded me to go and get a degree because it might be helpful at some point. And then one thing led to another, and I ended up doing a undergrad, master's and PhD. PhD back in the Amazon, started off doing studying the ecological modeling of an ant plant community dynamics. So collecting lots of ants from little trees that they live symbiotically with, and at one point having to count the queens in the leaf swellings, which involve cutting an entire treelet into pieces. And the ants' sole mission in life is to defend their tree. And so it gave a whole other meaning to ants in your pants.
We have now found the title of your podcast. Excellent. Thank you.
Yes. And then again with that, I loved the field work. I loved the story that we could tell about how it was a really neat system, but I couldn't get my head around why anybody would really care.
When you talked about not liking the disaggregation of the complexity in the bigger piece, I was like, how on earth did someone persuade you to do a PhD then? Because for people that don't know, it has been the world's leading expert of the head of one specific pin. It's not generalist at all. It is you are at the point to which you get your doctorate, that day you are the best person in the world at that thing because you've advanced thinking.
You know more and more about less and less until you know everything about nothing.
That is beautiful. I'm stealing that phrase.
Meme
Ellie's beaming behind the camera look at that phrase. Gorgeous. People assume you're clever if you've got a PhD.
Yeah,
it's
you're bloody minded.
It's relentless, right?
Yeah.
And suffering.
Yeah. And lonely. Because no one else is doing what you're
remember sitting on Christmas Day writing up my thesis, and my father-in-law, bless him at the time, was like, can you not give it up today? I'm like, yeah, but it's going to be there tomorrow. It doesn't go away. It's here until I'm done.
Yeah.
I was a very, very poor student, both financially and literally. And they asked for a final chapter late in my thesis, and my back was in such bad, I was playing competitive sport at the time and broken. And I had to sit in an empty bathtub because it was the only place I could find. My back didn't hurt all the time. And the last 2 weeks, wrote another chapter, handed it in, and they went, yeah, we don't think it needs it, and just binned it. And I was just broken. I was like, oh my God. Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's brutal. I actually tried to quit my PhD halfway through.
I think everybody does.
Because I realised that just being an academic for its own sake, I had absolutely no interest.
I didn't play American football.
Yeah, I was rowing.
Nice.
So what I really loved was turning around the university rowing team. And that was again
there's leadership again.
We've got a vision. I don't want to row as it is now because it's not interesting to me. But we didn't really have a squad. We didn't really have any coaching. We didn't really have any facilities. So it was like, right, how do you find all those elements, bring it together, put a team together, put them through, lead them through a really full-on training program.
How did you know you could solve that as opposed to just accepting it was fucked?
Because I think some of the steps just seemed obvious to me. I couldn't understand why people wouldn't be trying to, I think just, I don't know what it is, but there's something I've always seemed to have my sort of eyes and ears open to opportunities. And so you see something, like, well, yes, of course it means doing things a little bit differently, but why wouldn't you? And yeah, and then I don't know, that frustration, just I can't live with it, so I changed things.
That phraseology into, are you familiar with a guy called Nim Sadai? He climbed the 14, he was the first guy to climb the 14 biggest peaks in the world, like within a 12-month period. There's a Netflix
Wow.
documentary on him. Awesome guy. And they asked him, Tibetan guy, they said, oh, why did you do it? He just looked at them and went, well, because they're there. He didn't know why he did it. So I can hear so many phrases that you use that now I, with hindsight, look back and go, oh, I was meant to found something. I was meant to be an entrepreneur, whatever that means, because I couldn't not try and fix things or solve it. I worked in a restaurant cleaning dishes when I was like 15, and I rearranged the way the dishwasher worked to wash the things better. No one asked me to. I wasn't paid any. I didn't know to not do it. I can't see things and not try and fix it.
Yeah, but the downside, I mean, things escalate really fast. It's the problem. The
rowing story continues then, right? So
the rowing story continues and has evolved. And I did end up rowing pretty competitively for about 10 years. And then
say more. What does pretty competitively mean?
So when I was at the university, there's a race every.
Did you go back to Oxford for the next?
No. So I actually I'd been at Oxford for classics. When I did my undergrad, I went to Anglia Ruskin University, which is the other university in Cambridge. At the time, I think it was technically the worst university in the country. So I've done the full spectrum. I loved Anglia Ruskin.
Why?
It was because a couple of reasons. One, they had this amazing little animal and environmental biology team, and they didn't recruit lecturers who were necessarily sort of highly renowned researchers, but they loved teaching, and they loved getting everybody out into the field. We did tons of field work. It was really practical, really hands-on. There was one guy who's a primatologist, but he loved scuba diving. So he convinced the university that it was a key skill for ecologists to be able to dive. And he would run like 2 or 3 dive field trips subsidized by the university every year. But the other thing was that there were a huge number of mature students. So a lot of people who'd done something else with their lives and then were coming back to education, starting from, everybody felt like they didn't know anything to start with, including me, really. I didn't really have any science background, but had a real, knew why they were there and knew what they wanted to get out of it. And again, it all brought something different to the table, and that diversity of skill sets and people and experience. And so that was just the contrast to Oxford, where everyone felt like we were all the same. We'd all come through sort of very highly intensive academic programs, and were sort of, I found that suffocating. I loved Anglia Ruskin.
I think finding your place in the right time is so important. So did you stay there for masters and PhD as well?
No, I did my masters at Imperial, and my PhD at University of East Anglia in Norwich.
Nice, you did have a spectrum of.
So I do, yeah. I've tried out many different universities. Anglia Ruskin was my favourite, by far.
But the rowing persisted.
The rowing I started in Cambridge. That was at UEA.
Right,
that was in Norwich. And so with that, there's a race in the spring every year, which is basically the Oxford-Cambridge boat race course, raced in the opposite direction by basically every club in the country. So you've got like 308 racing down the river together, and it's absolute carnage. But and you start in the order that you finished the previous year, so you can sort of benchmark yourself against everybody else. So out of about
is there much turnover year on year in teams? So presumably you've got
completely. Often they're completely different. So the first year that I arrived, I think after about 310 boats, we came 280th or so, and 2 years later we came 47th. So sort of up into the top 50 in the country. We got to the semi-finals at Henley, and so we were a decent university crew then, with a very small squad. So you have to find that balance and between pushing everybody as hard as you can, but you can't lose people, and no one has to do it.
That's right? Literally running a startup.
Exactly. How and you've got to understand. You need to know the individuals. Then you need to know how do they respond to different sorts of motivation and different sorts of pressure. And it's exactly. Again, you wouldn't have known it at the time what you were sort of being prepared for, but totally.
Why do you think you're so good at suffering? Because PhD is relentless and
Yeah.
suffering. Rowing is notoriously agony.
Yeah.
and pain.
Expeditions also
Yeah.
pretty much full on suffering. I really, really enjoy being uncomfortable. I I don't like comfort particularly. And I think I was lucky to learn that quite early on.
Do you remember the first time you did realise that?
Yeah, I was just thinking, I think so when I was 14, I was the oldest of three.
Me too.
And oh really?
Yeah.
Shared pain there as well then. So, my sister was younger, she was 5 years younger than me. My dad decided for the millennium, I think they wanted to instigate having proper family conversations once a week.
My next brother's 5 years younger.
Okay.
As well, yeah.
Oh, cool. Yeah, my dad decided during this first instigated proper family dinner time conversation that we should do something to celebrate the millennium, and he wanted to get fit. So somehow we decided to cycle from Land's End to John O'Groats as a family. Not all at once, but over the course of the next year, and setting off on New Year's Day. And my sister was 9, so we must have been 9, 12 and 14. So over the course of the next year, yeah, we cycled over 1,000 miles from Cambridge to Land's End and then Cambridge to John O'Groats. And I think that was my first sort of expedition experience.
Did you enjoy it immediately or sobbed your way through it and then...
No, you never. And every time I do an expedition, I have to remember that it's really uncomfortable and really hard. And, the first week in the Amazon is hell. Everything's trying to eat you. You itch from head to foot. You can't touch anything. And then
everything's trying to eat you.
Everything's already eaten you. You're covered in bites. It doesn't matter what else eats you, and then you can chill out. And then you start seeing the magic. And I think it's this thing of having to put in the investment and put in the hard work and go to the uncomfortable places.
It's the Navy SEALs mantra of get full benefit from this. You're doing it now, so get everything out of it you can.
Get everything out of it, and then you're rewarded with these moments that you wouldn't. There's no other way to get other than being out in the environment, and having gone through the tough times. Those completely magical moments are just,
it's worth more if you have to earn it.
100%. And then there's also the thing about I like doing these things as teams, because it's about also those human dynamics and getting to know each other in the way that you do, and having to work hard through really tough situations.
What are you like on your own if you have to spend time solo?
Better than I thought.
Interesting. Please say more.
I never really spent any time on my own until about at the end of 2019. I blew up everything in my life all at once, quite spectacularly. Burned out, couldn't continue being CEO, which I didn't want to do anyway, but it took for me to actually burn out to convince anybody else that I shouldn't. And got divorced very amicably, but just decided we had different visions of life.
And was that an immediate flip, or had that been coming in extended amount?
Oh, again, you look back and you realize it was probably all the signs were there, and then quite quick. And that was really the first time that I spent time on my own. Just going off and heading over to Europe, taking myself on trips and holidays, and living on my own. And I discovered I really enjoy it. I love that time when you're not accountable to anybody else, and you can actually just be with yourself and be comfortable with yourself. But I don't feel like, I've been doing ocean rowing has been my latest extracurricular activity. But again, always in teams, and I'm not drawn to the idea of heading off across an ocean on my own.
So ocean rowing is quite a short sentence for something quite significant there. So help people understand what you mean by ocean rowing.
Probably people most often see ocean rowing in the context of going across the Atlantic. So you have rowing boats, which have got a little cabin at each end, which are either the maximum size of one of those cabins is about the size of a very small 2-man tent. So you can sleep in there, you've got lots of space under the deck to sort of store food and things. But yeah, essentially you just set off to sea in one of these boats. The Atlantic is the classic one, and people tend to go across the Atlantic when the trade winds and currents are pushing in the right direction. I haven't done that. I've done 2 circumnavigations of Great Britain in an ocean rowing boat, which sounds like less of a challenge because you're close to the land, but oh my goodness, it's hard because you've got tides. So I've done it twice in a 6-person crew. So you're there you're rowing 24 hours a day in 2-hour shifts. So 2 hours on, 2 hours off. You're sleeping maximum 90 minutes at a time. And your cruising speed is about 2.5, 3 knots. Quite often there are tides that are at least 2, 3 knots. In some places there's up to 14 knots of tide around the top of Scotland. And if you add in a little bit of wind going in one direction or another, there's half the time where you're going backwards or not moving or and then the other half of the time when you're sort of shooting forward. So psychologically it's super hard. Navigationally it's really hard because you've got to be in the right places at the right time.
For people listening to this and not watching, that was the biggest smile I had was with how hard it was.
Yeah,
this is fascinating.
I love that, and I love the challenge of really it's the navigation that I really enjoyed, and having to figure out, right, okay, where are we? What's the tide doing? What's the wind doing? What's the land doing? Well, how is that all going to interact? How do we then keep ourselves safe and make the right decisions about how far out we should be, what direction we should be going in? Should we be trying to anchor? Should we be trying to use the parachute anchor? There's like a million different things, and you're all super sleep deprived.
Do you end up getting good at training yourself to sleep in those windows? Because I imagine when you first start, you're like, because whenever you need to get to sleep, it's always harder to get to sleep. Mm-hmm. So talk to me about that process of acclimatizing to being on. How many days are you on the boat for as well?
So it's around between a month and 50 days.
Okay.
I should say the first year I got round the full thing, we had to have one stop, but otherwise it was pretty much in one go. And that was me and a team of 5 enormous men. So that was a bit unexpected, but a lot of fun. And I was just a member of the crew and in charge of the science, because these boats are modified to collect environmental data as we go. The second year I was skipper with a team of all women who worked in nature and climate, and telling stories of what's going on around the coastline as well as the science. And that was last summer, and we didn't get all the way around because the weather did all sorts of crazy things that it shouldn't be doing at that time of year.
It's almost like the climate's falling apart.
Almost like predictable weather systems are not showing up and something's going on with the climate. So the ability of our bodies to adapt to unusual situations is unbelievable. And you're right, the first 3 days or so, horrendous. And everything's new. You're trying to figure out how even if you've done all your training and all your practice, it's the first time you're setting off for that amount of time with everything. Getting into the cycle takes a few days and it's painful. And the worst thing is then when conditions are bad and you're having to make difficult decisions during that period. And also when people are seasick, which some people are to start with, and super hard. After about 4 days, your body just goes, oh, okay, I get this now. And it just becomes like that's what life is. And I got some of the best sleep of my life on those boats, because you've got the movement of the boat, the sound of the oars. Like I love it.
How many days post getting off did you need to get your land legs back? So So I used to do a lot of whitewater kayaking, and you go to sleep at night and you still go over the waves. Yeah. How many days back? A few days lying in bed, particularly when you shut your eyes and you can still sort of feel the movement. The first year I did in 2022,
when we had to have a little stop in Northern Ireland because we got stuck in a force 8 storm at the top of the Irish Sea. And the water's fine. The danger is the land. So when you've got tides and wind pushing you, and you've got land on both sides, and it's, so we had to get out of there, and that coming straight out of a big storm onto land, that was hilarious. Like, none of us could walk. We looked like we were completely drunk, trying to pull ourselves upstairs to get to the.
How calloused up are your hands? Are they bad?
They're fine.
How?
Yeah. Years of conditioning, and I did wear gloves pretty.
So mine are still bad from kayaking into weightlifting, but yeah.
See, I haven't done much for the last few months, so
let's go NatureMetrics first, and then loop to the various different adventures that brought us to.
So I mean, NatureMetrics came out of me trying to quit my PhD. When I realised that I didn't want to be an academic.
You weren't joking about these unfortunate accidents and incidents.
No, and unfortunately I'd learned this thing, which is that if you're not enjoying something, make a different choice, do something different.
Hell yes.
And I have to say that stood me in good stead pretty much every time throughout life. So I wasn't enjoying the PhD, didn't want to be an academic, didn't really care how far the ants moved in the generation, was pretty sure I'd messed up all the lab work because I'd got my plates back to front.
And was that a, oh fuck moment? This is like catastrophic, or was it like, oh?
It was just a niggle. In fact, it turns out I hadn't at all. The data was fine. But I doubted myself. I doubted myself a lot in that way. And I sort of had to, I didn't really have other people that I was working with who'd shown me how to do it properly. So
I sat bolt upright 2/3 of the way through my PhD, having done nothing other than go to the gym and play American football, and went, I'm fucked.
Yeah.
I've got to write 400 pages on this thing that's nowhere.
Yeah.
And I was like, right, okay. And the only way I managed to get back to sleep was to write a list of all the things, like 5 pages that I've got to do. Right, I'm going to have to outwork this now. Go.
Yeah. And it was, I think there was also an element of having gone, I've definitely spent a bit too much time in the rowing. Probably a little bit behind on things. But also I'd gone, I don't want to be an academic, but that stuff in the rowing, that thing of building a team and making things work. And I suddenly realized that was much more the business world. I'd never thought about business. I'd always been very much, I don't want to sit behind a desk. I don't, I want to, but I'd never really looked into what business was. I
had no idea.
Like,
literally nothing.
Idea of it just being about data entry or something, sitting in an office. And I suddenly realized that actually building teams was much more what happened in the business world. And so I went to try. I told my supervisor that I didn't want to be there, and he'd sort of lost interest in the ants and things as well at the time. And he said, okay, cool. I don't mind not carrying on with that piece of work or not taking it further. But before you disappear, there's this new thing you can do where you can take insect trap samples, and instead of having to look at each insect one by one under a microscope, which might take you half a day to identify a fly by dissecting its genitalia, and it might take 4 years to identify everything in 10 traps, you can just take the whole trap and stick it in a food blender and turn it into a soup and sequence the DNA of the soup in one go, and it tells you everything that's in there. And I think that's going to be the future of environmental monitoring. So if you wanted to start a business, we could try that and see if it's useful to anybody. And if it is, we could think about starting a business ourselves. And I was like, that sounds fun. And he said we could call it the Biodiversity Soup Company.
I think we might have suggested otherwise on a marketing perspective.
Yeah, that didn't stick. So I ended up and he said he'd set up a lab in China actually at the time, so he had a joint split position. So he'd also not been around for most of my PhD, so that loneliness was sort of exacerbated.
I should shout out and say my supervisors were excellent and were there. Thank you. I appreciate Stuart, Tom. Thank you.
Doug was great as well, but he wasn't there.
And academia is a really tough life.
It is. But anyway, he'd been setting up this lab in Kunming, China, in this sort of Institute of Ecology and Conservation. So he said, you can do all the lab work, just send it out to the lab in China and they can do the lab work, but we can focus on the data analysis and data processing and the ecology side of it. So I spent the last year of my PhD squishing up insect trap samples and sending them off for sequencing. And it was like, the step change in the scale of data that we could generate really quickly was like night
So
and
had
day.
someone else published on this that he'd seen, or it was an idea he had? Where in the genesis of development was it?
I think there had been 1 or 2 papers showing that you could do that. And it was not inventing the technology, because actually the key technological step was the ability, it was what was called at the time and still is in many cases next generation sequencing or parallel sequencing. So before that, if you were sequencing something, you could only sequence one thing at a time and you would get one sequence out. And so you had to set up a separate reaction for each organism. And if you accidentally got multiple in there, you'd get a mixed sequence that was useless. The high throughput next generation parallel sequencing basically allowed you to put in a mixed sample and get, at the time, hundreds of thousands of DNA sequences out, each one from a different molecule. So you'd get sequences across the full spectrum of what went in. Now it's billions of sequences that come out. The scale.
And what was the initial use case that was designed for?
So microbial work. So people have been using this to look at bacteria and microbes in general. And it had opened up the whole world of microbial biology, because before that you could really only study things that you could culture, and a lot of things you can't culture. And so for probably the best part of the decade before then, people had been sort of starting to use this technology for that. But this was the first time that we'd really sort of made the leap and go, oh, hold on, we could use this for looking at bigger things. So when we started off, it was taking organisms, mixed samples of organisms, and we could, not only can you blend them up and sequence the whole trap in one go, but you can sequence 100 traps in one go. And so we went back to a project that had been being done at the university looking at heathland restoration. And they'd had 2 years, I think, of pitfall trapping for ground invertebrates in this really great experimental design where they were looking at the best way of modifying grassy trackways to turn them back into heathland to make corridors between patches. And so they had a whole bunch of different types of interventions. Some of them were very light touch, some of them were very aggressive, and then they'd been looking at the communities of invertebrates to see which ones were working. And they would do 1 month of trapping per year, and then it would basically take them the rest of the year to get just the spiders, carabid beetles, and ants identified. And they had to send each of those groups off to a different expert at museums, and then the data would come back. We took all of the trap samples that were left over, blitzed them all up, sequenced them, and within about 6 weeks had replicated this guy's entire PhD. And because our data contained everything, not just the spiders, carabids, and ants. And that meant that we had a much bigger data set with much more statistical power to show change. So there were some things that from the original project looked like there might have been a difference, but there wasn't enough power to say statistically, yes, this is a change has happened. And with our data set, you could. So that was the first demonstration that this is faster and it's way more powerful for showing those fine scale changes. So you could use it for adaptive management, essentially.
So at that point, being a new technology, was it prohibitively expensive?
I wouldn't say it was prohibitively expensive, but it was only being done in the research world. So it wasn't being done, there was no way of doing it in a sort of high capacity way that would give a high level of consistency. So and that was really what we sort of felt, was that there was so much power in the data that we could generate, and it was such a step change. And we could show, we showed through the research that we could essentially replicate the ecological interpretations using our data compared with like the gold standard morphological ones, and that therefore, you know, it was good enough to be using it. But we thought there's a real risk here that we spend the next 10 years as academics arguing over the finer details and trying to sort of optimize to the nth degree, and don't actually just go out and get this in the hands of the people at the front line of conservation and environmental management who are needing to make decisions and don't have the data to make evidence-based decisions on. We started looking into how decisions were made. And I mean, basically, it was a data-free world. There was no, it was all based on intuition, assumptions, or indicators that when you traced back why they were indicators, it was just that there was somebody's favourite species once.
You were literally describing how large-scale landscapes are bought and sold in the UK. Someone turns up and goes, feels like it's about this.
Yeah. Yeah.
Absolute data.
And I think I had in my head then also the idea that because I'd seen what that sort of scale of data could do and the power that that has statistically, I must have heard some basic things about machine learning, and I had this idea that if you can generate data at those scales, you can start to use like big data approaches to sort of understand patterns and trends that you wouldn't necessarily be able to pull out by eye, and that you must be able to start to understand what does good look like. What's the typical community, even if we can't name everything, what's a typical community in a good quality soil or a good quality woodland or whatever, and then can we say how close we are to that? And you know, it's only again sort of happy accident that the whole world of AI and machine learning and everything has come on so far that that's now really easy to do, because I think when I first started thinking about it, it was a hard thing to do.
So do you remember the moment where you realised this can be a business?
A few helpful things happened. One was that, so we started off working with traps, so bodies of insects. And then toward just as I was finishing, the first papers started coming out on eDNA. So instead of taking the whole bodies of insects, just taking traces of DNA that have been left in water in the first instance. And there was a paper that came out which showed that this was a very sensitive way of detecting great crested newts in ponds. And I think DEFRA were under some pressure to do something differently for great crested newts from the EU. And so they jumped on this and said, brilliant, there's this great new technology, we can use it for great crested newts. And so they just approved it very prematurely. But it meant that there were people asking for eDNA tests of newts at the same time as we were wanting to set up.
I've never heard DEFRA being accused of doing things quickly before. So
yeah, no, this was very fast, and they basically just said, as long as you follow the protocol in this paper, it's fine.
It's amazing.
Yeah, it was also not the greatest way to do standardization because that paper was already out of date by the time, it was before we realized that we could get DNA from the water just by filtering it. So the way they did it in the early papers was with ethanol precipitation. So you would have all these tubes of ethanol and then add a little bit of pond water to each tube. It's like 15 mils of pond water into 6 tubes, so tiny amounts, and then send it back and centrifuge it down and extract the DNA. But A, you're only using tiny amounts of water. B, you're having to ship ethanol everywhere, and ethanol falls under dangerous goods licensing. So the logistics of sending kits out with ethanol in it, absolute nightmare. Anyway, we still have to do it like that, only for great crested newts.
Normal service is resumed. DEFRA doing something ridiculous unnecessarily.
This whole part of our lab now, which is just set aside to be able to do this like very, very out of date process with newts. One of
my favourite stories of that, after the Somerset floods in 2012 or something, one of the ministers announced they were going to dredge the levels to the 1960s design, because that's when everything was better. Now, this meant vertical bank on one side of the levels, cut across in an angle up. Mm-hmm. The problem was also by the health and safety rules there said they were not allowed a piece of equipment like an excavator that was modified in any way. It had to be shop bought, okay? there was not any equipment in the UK that was big enough to do the dynamic and the approach that they'd committed to doing. So they then had to ship a load of dredging equipment in from Holland to cut this thing that was environmentally devastating because it had been announced to that standard. Madness.
It's yeah. Anyway, it's yes, I don't want to burn too many bridges. But,
I'll just do that. Definitely know what I think about that. We had George Eustace in the shoot room a few months ago, and it was the most cathartic thing for both of us because I was in a director role at the EA while he was in DEFRA, and he was like, when I did this, did anything happen? No, George, it didn't. He's like, damn it, I knew. And the best one was Beavers, where he said 4 times he was assured. I don't know if we included this in the final cut, where he said 4 times he came, have I signed everything I ever need to sign? Is it done? Of course, Minister, it's absolutely done. 2 weeks later, just one more signature on this, Minister. And he said 4 times he tried to do it. So
wow, yeah. But anyway, so yeah, the timing of that was amazing. Of course, the first couple of years, all the labs got contaminated, and there was, including us. So 2016 was the first year that we did this as NatureMetrics. And we were setting up our labs. I'd got a little bit of investment. We were setting up our labs to be ready.
Where did principal investment come from? The first
business angels.
Okay.
So I found, and I'd worked for a year or nearly a year at a startup accelerator in London, just as an intern, helping out in the accelerator, which was amazing because I got to see across all the startups, and half of them were pure tech startups, half of them were social impact startups. So I got to see what are all the different ways you raise funding, where do you find investors, how do you put together a pitch deck and a business plan and all of that sort of stuff. Nobody believed that I could do it for biodiversity, but I was like, I'm gonna prove you wrong on that. And
Are you sure they didn't, or did you need to feel as if no one would believe it for you to go do it?
No, I distinctly remember being told by the director of the accelerator that it was a stupid idea and I'd be better off just working for one of the tech startups. I probably didn't have the greatest elevator pitch at the time.
Who does?
But it meant that I went out just to the classic tech investors. I knew where all the angel investor networks and things were and how it all worked. And obviously I was so different to everything else that they were hearing that I think there were a few of them that just took a punt on me because it was a bit mad. But one of our earliest investors was a director at Plant Life. So he, was 100% sort of bought into the importance
context
and the context. And the other, who's still on our board, he really saw the data angle and saw the parallels with other sectors that were data driven. And actually the thing that we cottoned onto at the beginning was that there was a market for environmental assessments because businesses doing environmental impact assessments have to do biodiversity baselining and restoration as part of the mitigation hierarchy. So that was the sort of existing commercial market that we sort of built the initial company around. And I think that's been one of the things, it's meant that we're not tied just to sort of the emerging markets like credits and sort of new financial models. We have something quite solid at the base of it.
Were you aware, and did you feel like the first in the sector at that point?
Yeah.
Was that always something that, and how did you feel about that?
I quite enjoy that. I like that, and it's been amazing because we were the first. I've been able to sort of represent the whole nature tech space and just be part of something that is much bigger than just ourselves.
You have to teach, right? You have to teach people what's
a lot of
possible
time teaching
and explaining and introducing.
Huge amount of that.
Yeah.
Huge amount of that. And we still do. Like, we still spend a lot of time educating. I'm like, I've been talking about this stuff nonstop for 10 years. How has everybody not heard it? But they haven't,
You ever heard unless you're bored of your message, not enough people have heard it yet? It feels like that sometimes, right?
Yeah, it does. Again, I was just very open to opportunities. I was open to sort of saying yes to things that were slightly outside the box. So then you end up we were invited very last minute to fill a slot at the biodiversity COP in Sharm el Sheikh in 2018. They wanted to put on they had a corridor where they wanted to have some sort of exhibition booths of innovation in biodiversity. And this was really before biodiversity was on the radar. And there was a handful of businesses turned up to that COP. But through that, you meet people, you start understanding what the wider policy environment is. People were starting to talk about the links between nature and climate. So then I started sort of following some of the climate agenda and going to the climate COPs and climate weeks. And, I think that because we were pioneers and because we were the sort of first, we were very much sort of representing nature and biodiversity in some of these spaces. So this has always been more for me than just building my own business.
Love it. Will we get to a point whereby eDNA-based approach and future evolutions completely outweigh traditional data collection methods? Are we there already?
I think it's using the right tool for the job. So the eDNA, and I would say eDNA is part of a package of tools. So you've got, I think, acoustics is very, very complementary with DNA. So we're starting to integrate some acoustics to what we do as well.
Are the sort of remote and machine-led acoustics as good as your ear yet?
Oh, I haven't gone head to head, actually. I'm only any good in the Amazon. I don't know. I haven't put any effort into learning anything else. I do have to like intentionally learn things, and then I learn them quite fast. But that would be an interesting one. I expect it's pretty
It's like
good.
when Garry Kasparov played like Deep Blue at chess. You can play the acoustic.
Yeah. No, I mean, it's amazing. It's amazing what these tools can do, but any tool has got its own unique set of like strengths and weaknesses and biases. And I think I think one of the things that I'm proud of is that we went into this, very much, we were all scientists to start with, which is a blessing and a curse in trying to build a business. But we were always very upfront with people about what eDNA couldn't do as well as what it could do. And I think that was key to building trust in something new. And you've got to go through the process.
Do people try and stop you doing that? The reason I ask the question is when we've never gone out to raise funding. We've been very fortunate that we've had private investment from the awesome people at the Oxygen House Group and friends and family. But when we've talked about the business, I had various slides that were like reasons to criticize us on our website and problems with this thing and things that won't work and challenges we have to. And more traditional sort of investment housing people have seen, you've got to take that out. My view is that's the way to build credibility, is to be honest about the challenges and the difficulties, because it looks like you're hiding it if not.
Yeah.
I wonder about your...
There's always this sort of tension, and it's striking the right balance, and it's also recognizing that we actually have to have different conversations in different situations with different types of stakeholders. And often our clients will bring in their biodiversity people who are ecologists who, they want to go into the detail. They want to understand this stuff, and they will challenge it because they understand what they can do now. And in those situations, you absolutely shoot yourself in the foot if you try to pull the wool over people's eyes or gloss over the limitations. You have to be completely upfront and say, hands up, I can't do this. It's not great at doing that, but here's where it's completely transformational. And generally that's A, in scale, and B, in being able to give data on things that are really hard otherwise. So, things like freshwater fish, even marine fish, fish in general, insects, invertebrates, small stuff, things that's really hard to identify or things that are really rare and hard to find. And that, build the value proposition around what the tool is really, really good at, and then say, look, this is part of a tool set. There will be things where you need to go in with boots on the ground and ecologists because you need to know things that this can't tell you. There'll be times when, do you know what, acoustics is better for interior forest birds than eDNA is. You can get started with some stuff for using satellite imagery. It's not trying to say, we're competing with every other tool out there. But yeah, it's...
So is the evolution of the wider business a greater array of sensors and techniques and more remote acquisition? Do you think it will continue to grow that ecosystem of tools at your disposal?
Yeah. So that's definitely part of it. And in a sense, those other tools are much more. The barrier to entry is much lower. They're more accessible. There's a lot that you can sort of pull in from existing data sources, which is what most people are doing because that's the easy thing to do. I sort of feel like we did the hardest bit first, which is generating new data on species at scale from the ground. And the eDNA really is the most amazing tool for that. So now that we've got that, it's sort of bringing everything else in sort of on top and around of that. So you've got a full package, but also looking at how can, obviously the AI world is evolving very fast, and we can ask questions of our data that we couldn't have done a few years ago. So then but the quality of the insights that come out of AI are very dependent on the quality of the data that goes in and having enough of the right sort of data in the right places to really be able to build models. So that sort of modeling approach is something that we're doing a lot of now, because ultimately it reduces the amount of sampling that people have to do on the ground because you have the background context to sort of understand the information that's within a particular sample.
What is the size of the business now in terms of people and scope? Try and articulate that in some numbers for us.
So we have about 110 people. We have worked with over 600 clients in 110 countries. So we've been pretty global.
That's incredible, right?
It is. Like, honestly, it's kind of mind-blowing. And I could never. We were just chatting in the break, actually. I think I never expected this to be successful. Most startups aren't.
Nope.
And I think
99% fail or something.
Yeah. And I've never been afraid of failing. And so I think I went into this thinking it'll probably fail because statistically most of them do, but I'm going to have a go and I'll learn a lot along the way. And so it was kind of a big surprise and a little bit terrifying when it all started working, and then, things fall and then you've got more and more to lose and more people to let down and further to fall. And, it becomes very different that first year when I nearly killed our business by contaminating our labs with great crested newt DNA. And instantly the key to that as well was being totally open and honest with our clients about what had happened and what we were doing to fix it. And, that gave us a lot of credibility.
I adore that you've said. So I carry guilt really heavy. So if I did anything wrong as a kid, I felt guilty about it for days and weeks. So in life, I've learned, just don't do anything to feel guilty about. Otherwise you have to feel that, which is why that's kind of led to a world of transparency in every way is just better.
Yeah.
So we're incredibly transparent about what we do. And regularly someone will go, but that's making our lives harder. Shouldn't we just not say anything? No, that's not who we are as a business. Even if it gets us criticized or challenged, I'm going to be honest and transparent about everything we're doing. And it feels like the world's turning to really appreciating that more.
Yeah. I think maybe as we have less trust in the things that we're seeing online and the authenticity of information, the value in real openness, honesty, integrity, authenticity is becoming
supplanting
higher.
our brain.
Yeah,
there's less of it, so it's worth more.
But I just know I will. If I try to hide things or I try to gloss over them, I know I'll get found out.
If you're gonna lie, you have to be cleverer than everybody else you'll ever talk to about it, and just don't.
Yeah.
Just don't. Just be honest.
I'd rather be like, hands up, I messed
got this
up.
wrong. Yeah.
We messed up. This is what we've learned. This, we were able that year. It was awful. It was horrible, but we kept almost every client came back to us again the next year, and we were able to say to them, this is what happened. This is why. This is what we're going to do to make sure that going forwards we are the most resilient out there to contamination, because we've had this experience and it will make us stronger. And that stood us in really good stead, and I think has been sort of also laid the foundations for who we are as a business. Now, as you grow, the narratives do have to change a little bit, and you do have to go out and have different sorts of conversations. And, particularly when we're trying to work with businesses at higher levels, and so we've gone from being very project by project to saying, okay, actually we can provide data across a whole portfolio of projects and then be able to summarize that data up so it's useful for feeding into corporate reporting, for example. But that means you have to have conversations with people who don't know anything about biodiversity. And in those cases, you talk very differently. And because actually, if you open up, exactly, and if you open with like, here's all of the problems with it, and here's all of the things that it can't do, they'll just, run a mile. So I think that tension is necessary, and it's become a bit of an art sort of working. We don't always get it right, like 100%. We end up having the wrong conversation with the wrong people sometimes. And the other tension has been, we have a lot of scientists and a lot of ecologists, and they're absolutely brilliant, and they're the heart of our business, and they're the reason that what we do has like robustness and validity, and we can stand behind it with confidence. But for the scientists, it's a big change going into a world where we're not going to write 5 papers and a PhD on this before we go out and start using it. We'll learn by doing, and we'll learn by not getting it quite right and getting feedback and iterating, and that's okay. And we can actually run quite fast, and we can push things out that we're not super confident in, and we can be open about that. But I've loved watching over time, gradually building this sort of core of really amazing scientists who love that and who get it and have embraced it. And we still have that tension all the time of the scientists, being not quite ready or comfortable and sort of pushing a little bit further than that, but also making sure that the people, now we have a lot of people in our business who are not scientists, and we need to make sure the scientists have a strong enough voice that they can challenge and they can say, actually, you're using that in the wrong way, or you're talking about that in the wrong way, or that's not right.
Trying to stay in that sweet spot of healthy tension is going to be really interesting, because as the next generation of scientists come through, they're going to be more exposed, more aware of, more used to machine learning, database stuff, more commercially minded, because young people definitely are. So you're going to have to pivot in other ways to try and keep it in that sweet spot.
Yeah, definitely. And that's on both sides, right? So we have, again, there's a huge amount of education even within our business, because we have people, in the sort of engineering and software and tech, and some of the data scientists who, you're right, they're not ecologists. They have to learn a certain amount of ecology to be able to have the right conversations and ask for help in the right times. Similarly, the ecologists have to learn some of that, and they have to learn some of the language, some of the processes, some of the, they're getting skilled up in all of the AI and, data science stuff, so that you can really bring everybody together to have a high enough quality discussion and conversation and decision-making process to end up with the right product. And so, it's fun. It's really fun. But it does take a lot of investment in getting that right.
When you, hearing you share some of your story and looking back over the various different chapters, I mean, your chapters are like this right now. It makes perfect sense. I think often founders who have been able to build businesses that at least have a period of success, it's the creation of the chapters of them as people. If you weren't such a polymath with so many different interests, and the business couldn't be what it is, because you need to have that range of things. If you were just a scientist or just a commercial person, it wouldn't work.
Yeah.
And you can speak to them all because of that range of experiences.
And I think that's still my, I don't lead the company anymore. I haven't done since early 2020. We're on our second CEO. And we have an amazing exec team who are not scientists for the most part. And I think where I'm still valuable is really in being able to speak all of the different languages, having enough knowledge of what actually goes on at each part. I know how a bioinformatics pipeline works. I know what goes on in the lab. I know what influences what. Couldn't necessarily do it myself, but I can challenge, and I can have a detailed conversation with people at each part, all the way through to, right, what's the market doing? What are the emerging financial systems? What are, and that there's a handful of other people in the company who can sort of go enough across those pieces. But that breadth of knowledge is rare.
That's why it's unique to the founder.
Can
you give us a couple of the pinch me moments throughout the years when you've gone, what on earth is happening? Or how are we here? Or there's really special moments that you almost can't believe.
I mean, a huge one has been being a finalist of the Earthshot Prize, which
It's incredible.
Which is it is an incredible thing. And I think, a few years ago when it first got launched, I remember seeing it and thinking, right, that really is like the pinnacle in our space, and particularly because it's across all types of environmental solutions and all types of organizations. So it's not just a sort of, nature tech thing. And they do a lot of due diligence. The process is long, and we've gone through it twice actually. The first year we got through the long list and then didn't make it.
So they come in and visit you and speak to you?
They come in and visit you. There's multiple 2-hour interviews. There's, they need to make sure that if they're going to platform something that it's legit and it's good, and that it's really mission driven. And so we actually found out about being a finalist while I was away on my rowing expedition. And I told the team, I'm out for a month. I'm probably not going to be in contact at all. We were also in the middle of an investment round. So it was like terrible timing on lots of fronts. But I was like, no, I'm going to do this. I've committed to do it. I've put this team together. I wouldn't just put my foot down about that. I thought if there's one thing that they do get in touch with me about while I'm away, it'll be if we hear anything from Earthshot in a positive sense. And I didn't hear anything, so I assumed that, same as before, we hadn't got through.
Did it even cross your mind on the boat, or are you just in the water?
I think it did once or twice. I thought, it's funny, we haven't heard anything for a while, and but I'm sure they would.
Then there was a wave or a dolphin or something else.
Yeah, exactly, or another storm.
Yeah.
When I got back, the first time I went into the office and sat down and with our CEO for a catch up, and she got her phone out and started filming me. I was like, this is weird. And then they told me apparently they needed to capture my reaction for the all of the content that Earthshot put together. And they hadn't wanted to tell me while I was on the boat because I was on the boat with other people from the environmental space, and it was all supposed to be a big secret, and they didn't believe that I wouldn't tell them, which I totally would have told them.
Yeah.
They were right.
I'd have done the exact same. Of course, yeah.
So, we were sharing everything on that boat. It was a huge surprise. And just like an incredible honor to be part of that group. And the best thing is just we spent five days before, so we all went out to Cape Town for the the big awards ceremony and things. And we spent 5 days before that on a retreat with all of the finalists and getting to know them all. These are people from like right across the world, all different types of organizations, all different types of solutions. The sparks that were flying in terms of like ideas and ways to work together and to put together the different things that we do was just like completely magical. And one of the other finalists was the Amazon Sacred Headwaters Alliance, who are an alliance of all the indigenous groups in Ecuador and Peru in the Amazon, including the community that I first went out to Ecuador to help. So it was this like amazing full circle thing.
If you had have won, would you have?
I would have used it to work with the others in our category for sure. But in fact, one of them is already one of our clients. So we were already collaborating with them. But yeah, it's been amazing. And then I sort of bring it back to what I was mentioned earlier around the speaking and giving talks. We had a session the other day with Christiana Figueres on public speaking, which is just those moments are just like I can't believe that I'm sitting here with these people being coached by Christiana Figueres, but it was all about her big thing was bring humor, bring your personality, bring your vulnerability, and engage with your audience and take them on a journey and tell them a story. And I think that the storytelling for me is the piece that has been missing from the environmental space and the scientific space, and that we have so much opportunity to do so much better. So a lot of what I'm looking at now, and a lot of my sort of side projects are really about how do we tell stories about what's going on out there, and how do we tell the stories of positive action and of hope and potential that give people something that they can latch onto to actually change behavior.
You've done a wonderful job of that today, Kat. Telling some fantastic stories. Sadly, our time is coming to an end, but we have to do it because we could do an entire episode on, you transitioning from day-to-day CEO to overseeing the business, to all those aspects, and talent acquisition and all those things. But our final question I love to ask everyone is, what is the one question I haven't asked you wish I had?
What are you doing next?
What are you doing next, Kat?
So I'm still with NatureMetrics, but now on a part-time basis. And for me, the two things this last year have really sort of reconnected with why I got into this in the first place. For me, I'm a total accidental entrepreneur. Tech, like, if you'd said to me I'd have founded a tech company, I'd never in a million years have believed you. And it's been amazing. But it feels like a bit of a detour for me from sort of why I got into this in the first place, which was around finding new income streams for local communities so that they didn't need to degrade the natural environment. And I think both sort of meeting the guys from the Amazon through the Earthshot Prize, and also doing the rowing expedition that we did last year. And I mentioned that part of the mission for that was telling the stories of what was happening around the coastline. And actually, because we didn't manage to get all the way around, we then ended up doing a lot of it overland. So we actually went and spent time with the communities around the coast. And it was probably the most inspiring 10 days of my life, really seeing all these things that I thought I knew about and that we talk about, mostly thinking about the global south in terms of community empowerment and all of the indigenous knowledge, etc. And seeing that play out here was something that it hit me really hard in a really positive and exciting way. And so we're making a film off the back of the row, which is really about really focusing on that, using the adventure piece to sort of bring in the stories. So my main goal for this year is to get that film made, and I'm running an event in Climate Week where we'll bring together the voices of everybody that we heard and met, and we're launching a new charity off the back of that. So for me, it's it's beginning of a bit of a new chapter, which involves going much more like back down to the ground, back down to like what's actually happening, and how can we sort of use what I've learned and the amazing networks that I've made and experiences that I had, and bring those to really sort of much more directly feed into action on the ground.
Incredible. Thank you so much for making the time and coming in. It's been a pleasure. We've wanted you on the show for ages and can't wait to have you back again.
Oh, thank you so much. I loved it.
Thanks, guys.